I want to kind of just talk about this concept because I think it's one of those really popular sort of in this modern day, there's a lot of talk about self-love. What does it mean to have self-love? And I think it's also important to define self-love in a healthy way, because we are a people of extremes, right? I think that it's important to talk about these extremes so that we are aware of them, we beware of them, and we find that middle ground. So I think on one extreme you have this trend, right? Of, you know, yes, love yourself. It's all about you. But the problem is we've also, in a sense, moved into a culture of narcissism. And what does that mean? Well, narcissism is a personality disorder in which a person lacks empathy, and this is one of the most striking kind of characteristics of a narcissist. It's a person who basically only sees themselves, who only sees their own needs and their own perspective in any situation. And so somebody who is a narcissist would have difficulty seeing beyond themselves, beyond that self-centered sort of view, and that they would have difficulty taking the perspective of another person. They would have it would be very difficult for them to show empathy for others. It's a very self-absorbed type of disorder, and ironically, it's actually grounded, and this is very important for the topic we're discussing today. It's ironically grounded in insecurity. So oftentimes, a person who is actually at the root very, very insecure, they would cover that up, or it would be covered up by this narcissism, by basically putting themselves as basic. They become very needy, needy of praise, needy of admiration, more than just approval. But a narcissist needs to constantly be not just approved of, but admired, almost worshipped, in a sense. And again, there's a total lack of compassion for others and understanding and empathy for others. And so it's a very unhealthy kind of self-focus, right? But then you have, on the other hand, the other extreme, and that's kind of what I want to talk about mostly today, is when a person completely lacks self-love, completely lacks healthy self-compassion. Now, what is self-compassion and what is healthy self-love? Well, a person with healthy self-compassion and self-love will have a healthy self-image, will have a sense of worth for themselves. So without being a narcissist, without believing that you are at the center of the universe, but having value for yourself, believing that you are worthy, believing that you have worth, believing that you are deserving of respect, that you are deserving of love and respect and belonging, that you have self-respect, right? Now, what does that look like practically, right? I think that one of the biggest sort of traps that we fall into, and I've heard this over the years countless times. A lot of us, and I would say especially women, are extremely hard on ourselves. And when I say that we are hard on ourselves, I don't mean that, we push ourselves to be our best in a healthy way. I mean that we beat ourselves up, and it is not healthy. And one of the ways that I think one of the most common ways that we beat ourselves up, as especially as women and generally also men, is that we have a habit which is extremely toxic called negative self-talk. Now, negative self-talk is basically the way in which we speak to ourselves, the way in which we have an inner conversation with our own selves. So, for example, when something happens in our lives, how do we talk to ourselves about it, right? Specifically when it's something negative, when maybe we make a mistake, or we let another person down, or we let ourselves down. We're not, we're not at that level of perfection that we might hope. How do you talk to yourself? This is extremely important because this ends up becoming the foundation of our own relationship with ourselves. Now, I want you to remember that this is integral. This is absolutely essential when we talk about the relationship with our Creator. We can't really have a full, meaningful, deep, healthy relationship with our Creator if we do not have a healthy relationship with ourselves. And it goes the other way around. It goes both ways, that our relationship with ourselves is linked to our relationship with the Creator. And it should be, right? Where should we get our self-worth, right? Because this is, we're living in an age right now of social media, for example. Now, in the age of social media, in the Instagram world and the Facebook world and the TikTok/Snapchat world that we live in, what's happened now, especially for the younger generation, is that so much of our self-worth is now being linked to what other people say about us, what other people think about us, specifically online, right? And that's why they're finding studies right now that the level of depression, the level of anxiety, even eating disorders, suicidality, that all of these things are actually increasing. And they found that there is a link between social media usage and the increase in these things, and the increase in loneliness, depression, anxiety. And so what's happening here, why is that happening? I mean, we're not using social media just to go, find out about, a hadith, or to just maybe find out what our friends are doing. But we're using social media for a much deeper reason. And a lot of it has to do with our own self-worth, that we're linking our self-worth to what other people are saying about us and the approval of others. And that becomes extremely dangerous because, as you know, the people will love you one day and they'll hate you the next, right? People will approve of you 1 minute and they'll disapprove of you the next minute. We cannot link our self-worth to what other people feel about us, or what other people say about us, or what other people think about us. This is a very unstable foundation for our own worth. And when a person becomes the definition of their worth is linked to what other people are saying or how other people view them, that person becomes extremely insecure and their self-worth is unstable. And so our self-worth has to be linked to something that is stable and something that does not something that doesn't run out, right? I mean, a person can only give you so much praise, right? A person is limited. People are limited. A person, people, the creation can only give you so much approval, right? What if they're tired? What if they're in a bad mood, right? Sometimes we get headaches, right? Sometimes we ourselves are empty and it becomes difficult to fill another. When you look at a person who is extremely needy or who is dependent upon another person for their own inner fill, when you become dependent on another, so for example, someone who's dependent on their spouse to make them feel okay, or who is dependent sometimes on their own children. This is a very unhealthy type of attachment and sometimes narcissism, where they need their children to make them feel important. They need their children to make them feel that they're okay. Or maybe it's their social circle, or maybe it's their online community. Now, when you have that as your source of your own self-worth and your own to fill your void internally, well, what happens when that individual, your spouse or your child, is busy or isn't in a good mood or is feeling empty themselves? What happens when the online community turns on you, right? What happens when there's a scandal and everyone who loved you yesterday hates you today? That's the reality of the online world. That's the reality of human beings, is that human beings are not stable. Human beings are limited. Human beings do not have an infinite capacity to give, right? We are limited as human beings. Yes, we can give love, right? We can give love to our children. We can give love to our parents, our spouse, to our friends, to our family, but we are limited. We, as human beings, are not Al-Wadood. We are not the infinite source of love. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be an infinite source of love and support. So it's very essential that we root our self-worth in something that is infinite, in something that is stable, something that doesn't just is not fickle, right? It does not just turn on us when they're having a bad day. And so it's very, very essential that the foundation of our self-worth is in something stable and something infinite. And that is only God. That is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Al-Wadood. And these are the concepts. I mentioned before in my previous session that one of the things I'm trying to do in my class, Transformed, it's called Transformed Principles of Spiritual Development. And the reason it's called Principles of Spiritual Development is that I try very hard to make these concepts practical, right? I think that so many of these concepts that we learn by our teachers and by our parents and, growing up, concepts about Allah, concepts about love of Allah, hope in Allah, trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Wadood. These are concepts that are very theoretical.